Welcome to Nerds at Church, a queer feminist indie podcast diving deep into faith, nerdery, and the Bible. I'm Pastor Emily, and I use pronouns like they, them, theirs.
And I'm Pastor Kay, and my pronouns are she, her. In this episode, we'll discuss Season 5.
Woohoo!
Yay!
You can become a Patreon supporter for more content at patreon.com/nerdstatchurch and check out the episode description for links to any references we make in this episode, which is not going to be much, but probably the Bible passage.
Sure.
But if you become a Patreon supporter, we will love you more.
And we have lots of extra content for you if you're a Patreon supporter, and we'll get into that later.
Yeah.
But as you've noticed, Nerds at Church has gone to a new podcast format. Instead of putting out an episode for each Sunday and additional holidays on the lectionary cycle, we've decided to go to a semester system, where we will have semester seasons that are a few months long each, putting out about an episode per week, and each semester will be focused on a theme. For Season 5, our next semester theme is superheroes.
Woohoo.
Each episode will make connections between heroes in pop culture, in the Bible, and in history, like real life history. And throughout the season, we're hoping to deconstruct and reconstruct what does it mean to be a hero,
Or a villain.
and who can be a hero, or I suppose a villain.
We are hoping that this makes our podcast more accessible for lay people and folks who aren't super connected to the church or to particular readings for scripture each week in worship. So please share this with parishioners, friends, and colleagues. We'll still be connecting with scripture and Christianity so folks can, as always, explore faith in new ways. We are Nerds at Church, after all.
Yes. And of course, we will still have a Muppets moment at the end of every episode, because you all have been very clear that we should. Who are we to argue? And so we will also continue to be a non-explicit podcast, except for some of our Patreon-specific content, because you do have to be over 18 to be a Patreon. So not all of our movie commentaries are non-explicit, but all of our regular podcast episodes that you can access without giving us extra money are. And of course, for all of our content, we will have any content notifications stated upfront so that listeners of all ages can engage. Plus, we've got stuff going on YouTube so that captions are available for whoever needs them.
And we reserve the right to not put out an episode during occasional busy times or if we get sick.
Holy Week.
Well, Holy Week's a bit behind us now, but yes, Holy Week, Christmas.
It'll come around again, Emily. I know it will. Yes.
And if we get really excited about something, we may add an episode into what's planned here and there. Then, between semester seasons, we'll take a couple weeks off for planning and recording ahead. If there are topics, nerdy, churchy, or both, that you'd love for us to cover, let us know on social media or send us an email at nerdsatchurch@gmail.com.
And we'll go through our social media handles again at the end of this episode.
Yes. So, the big question of this season is, what is a hero? We, in our dominant U.S. culture, which is the one that Kay and I are most familiar and immersed in, we have some, big points that tend to be common threads around how we talk about heroes in this country. The first is that heroes frequently are deemed patriotic. This can border on nationalism, but the number of particularly superheroes in pop culture who have red, white, and blue as their colors is, astounding. And maybe a little bit concerning.
It's amazing how many American flags you can drape around one person if you really want to.
Right? All the while, it's actually against proper flag etiquette to wear the flag.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's fun. Also, one of the ways that we've talked about heroes, particularly since the pandemic began, is thinking about essential workers, for example, as heroes. And one of the things that happened because of that is that they became more expendable, more allowed to die, more expected to sacrifice themselves for others, whether or not that's what they wanted and whether or not they got paid enough to do that. So that's, problematic. And then also, we talk about superheroes, especially pop culture superheroes, so frequently they are vigilantes. And in reality, we're not such fans of vigilantes necessarily.
Yeah, no.
But there's an interesting way laws do and don't apply to superheroes and how that is decided.
Not to mention the laws of physics.
Right. The laws of physics are some of the laws that we tend to be more in favor of, I guess. Anyway.
Gravity is good.
Right. Other laws are, made up by people with power, and those are more problematic. And then the final piece is that we think about heroes and we talk about heroes as having special abilities or skills, as working alone, as being the one person. And this happens in pop culture, obviously, but also in history, right? The way we talk about Martin Luther King Jr. is that he was the only one and he did it all by himself and he was perfectly blameless and never did anything wrong. And one of the things about that is that it makes it so that we feel like it's impossible for us to be the heroes because we're not perfect. Well, the good news is neither was Dr. King and neither are any of the heroes. That would be such a boring movie or comic or book.
Yeah. So as we deconstruct and reconstruct the idea of what does it mean to be a hero, we will realize, for example, that a hero does not have to be about their country, patriotism, and certainly not nationalism. But it does involve care for your community, for humanity as a whole, for something larger than yourself. You can't be a hero just for yourself. That's not how this works.
Mm-hmm.
You're working for others. We also want to put a value and worth on essential workers and jobs who are often working for very low wages. In fact, a number of the heroes that we're spotlighting are folks who did not earn a lot of money as we go through. And even when we're talking about pop culture superheroes, a lot of our superheroes that we're talking about did not work for a lot of money in their day jobs either. I feel like this is a good spot to point out two of the heroes we're not spotlighting this season. We're not doing a Batman episode. I love Batman. Batman is fascinating in so many ways, but that gets complicated. We're going to talk about some of the Batman characters, but
I was going to say, in some ways we are highlighting Batman, but yeah.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a few minutes. But Batman is not one of the stars of our show this season because partly he does everything from money. And we're also not going to be talking about the TV show Homelander, which has a starring character who is sort of a patriotic, nationalistic, joke practically from what I hear. I don't actually watch the show, but I've read some interesting commentary. And so we'll be spotlighting a lot of folks who, even though they're a pop culture superhero, they also have a day job and they have to, figure out how to make rent.
Yeah, and that some of it, particularly for historic heroes, it's not just that they're low-wage jobs, and even for the pop culture heroes and stuff, that there is an element of outsiderness, of being cast out, that...
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
When we think about it as they're heroes and therefore they can sacrifice themselves, we estrange people that we label heroes like essential workers. And I think that's an important thing that we haven't really wrestled with as a culture. And so that's part of the deconstructing and reconstructing.
Absolutely. And so we'll be talking about things like the developing morals of heroes as they realize that that's the shoes they're stepping into, essentially, and also the importance of having systems of accountability for heroes, not just pop culture superheroes, but also for real life heroes in history and so forth. And we'll be talking a lot about ordinary people working together, because really the full truth is that no one works alone, no matter how much we might want to tell ourselves otherwise.
Yep. There's always a great contingent of people working together, even when one person is the spokesperson or is deemed the leader.
Or giving the credit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as we get into the season overview, this season we're really excited about because in a lot of respects it is a season that works well with a variety of ages. Obviously, Kay and I are fully grown adults, at least in a legal sense.
Maturity levels to be determined.
Yeah. But this also would be a great series that you could do for high school or college folks, or maybe even middle school folks, depending on their maturity levels. Obviously, it's trickier with younger folks because we're digging really deep into these episodes.
it turns out you don't really need a hero if you don't have a problem to solve, and some of those problems are kind of horrifying.
Yeah, true. But if you are interested in using this season as a basis for a more formal curriculum that you go through with youth groups or young adults or whoever, we are happy to transform this into a written out curriculum. We would do this if you pay us because that is extra labor.
A lot.
A lot of extra labor.
Yeah, not pay us a lot, but it is a lot of extra labor. But yes.
Yes. So let us know if you are interested in doing that, and we would be happy to figure out how to make it work if we get enough people to do it. The more people that want it, the cheaper it gets, basically.
Yeah.
That's how it works. So definitely let us know, and we are glad to make that resource available.
Absolutely. So, as we started to talk about what we could do this season, we had certain heroes who we wanted to spotlight. It was actually a fairly short list to start off with, and then it got much longer, much faster than we expected. Then we asked, who should we compare and contrast each of these people with? And then we essentially finalized for each episode what is the theme that connects all three heroes, that is, the pop culture, the historical, and the biblical heroes. What is the theme that connects all of these people together for each episode? And then we realized, hey, we should have a scripture story or a reference that is a theme that connects us for the whole season. And one of the initial people on that very short list that I immediately brought up as soon as we started talking about superheroes for myself was Esther, because the story of Esther is the story of a ordinary teenage girl who gets put in a very weird and frankly awkward and horrifying situation and winds up saving her people because she is in this extraordinary place. And so in the book of Esther, chapter 4, we read that Esther is in the king's harem, and Mordecai is basically asking her to speak up on behalf of the Jewish people who are facing genocide. And she tells Mordecai that what he's asking her to do could very easily get her killed. And so he replies, "For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. Who knows? Perhaps you have come to royal dignity for just such a time as this."
Which I love. And
Yes.
after that, so the link that we're including in the episode description actually gives that whole paragraph passage of Esther chapter 4, verses 9 through 17. And what she does after Mordecai says this, in reply to Mordecai, is she says, "Go and gather all the Jewish people to be found in Susa and hold a fast on my behalf." And so she asks Mordecai to gather the people to support her and pray for her as she goes to do the scary, bold, and faithful thing that he is calling her to do.
Yeah. And so one of the themes that we're going to be talking about this season, having heard all of this, is that we have to agree that heroes certainly feel fear. Of course they do. The ones who actually exist in real life, at least. The fictional ones, the well written ones, definitely feel fear too. But what makes them a hero is not that they don't feel fear, it's that they do the brave thing despite the fear. That's what makes a person a hero. And so Esther did it. So many of the other people we're going to talk about this season did it. And that is essentially one of the themes we're going with this season.
Yep. So, the question we've all actually been waiting for, which heroes are we covering anyway?
So many.
So many. In fact, I believe it's something like 33.
Yes.
So, for episode 1, we knew we wanted to have a Superman episode because Pace, who is a huge Superman stan and is going to be our guest for this episode, pointed out that Superman is in so many ways the original superhero, the first of so many. And so we were just really excited about diving into Superman and having both Superman and the way that Superman was created be a basis for this first episode. And then as we were thinking about who else to do, Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez came up as historical heroes that could pair really well with Superman. And then we couldn't help but think of Ruth, who is such a brilliant biblical hero, and the connecting piece that we thought of for all three of these was the ways that immigrants improve the place that they're in. So we're super excited to kick off the season with this episode.
Yeah. And our second episode, both of us love the biblical story of the daughters of Zelophehad. They were absolutely on the short list of the very first set of names we came up with for this season. Emily, as soon as we said out loud that we wanted to do the Daughters of Zelophehad, said, well, we have to compare them to Echo from the MCU. And then as we looked around for a historical hero to add to the list, we also found Wilma Mankiller. And so the theme and connection for this episode that we'll be talking about is collaboration and collective power.
I'm so excited. I'm just so excited about this whole season. Also, shout out to friend of the podcast, Susanna Porter, who is actually the one who first came up with the idea of doing a superhero season. Brilliance, really.
Yeah.
And then for episode 3, we're doing Jesus. Let's be honest. We've wanted to do an episode like this since we started the podcast, and this season gives us the perfect excuse. Our pop culture hero is Jesus, as in myth busting. What exactly does American society say about Jesus? And what lies are we telling about Jesus? Yes, it will probably include a reference to Obi-Wan Kenobi. Also, our historical hero is Jesus, and our biblical hero is Jesus. And surprising everyone on the podcast, I'm sure, our theme and connection piece is Jesus.
Yes, I'm looking forward to all of these episodes, but especially that one.
Yes, especially as it will be episode 3. Yeah, we did that on purpose.
Yes.
Don't worry.
Yes. I think I was the one who typed up historical hero Jesus, pop culture hero Jesus, biblical hero Jesus, theme connection Jesus, and I took so much joy in that.
It's true.
For our fourth episode for this season, we started with the idea of Spider-Man and his well-known catchphrase of, with great power comes great responsibility. And this is a common idea for a lot of superheroes, both in pop culture, history, and the Bible. The idea that when you have the ability, you need to use it to help others. You have a responsibility to. And so we started with Spider-Man, and we decided to explore that theme further with the historical hero, Queen Jinga Bondi of Africa. She was queen of 2 African kingdoms around what is modern-day northern Angola. And she was queen during the rise of the slave trade in Africa, and faced many difficult decisions. And we'll also be talking about the biblical hero, Daniel, who was put in an impossible place of serving an enemy ruler while also trying to protect his own people and, of course, trying to survive himself. So we look forward to this episode, and it should be a really interesting conversation.
Yeah. And then episode 5 came about because I love Kamala Khan as the new Ms. Marvel. And the strength, particularly within Islam, of those who are doing justice. Plus, we are so ridiculously excited to have Lamia H. as a guest, because Lamia's book, Hijab Butch Blues, does an incredible job of weaving together stories from the Quran with Lamia's own lived experiences. And so being able to talk about Malala Yousafzai and her strength and courage, Kamala Khan and her powers, and then also the story of Esther and the story of Asiya, which is the kind of closest parallel in the Quran. And to do it with Lamia H, I am so excited. If you have the chance to read or listen to Hijab Butch Blues before this episode comes out, please do it. It is phenomenal and so worth it. One of the overarching connections for this episode are that these are all young people in seemingly impossible situations who nevertheless find ways to save lives, which is cool.
Yeah. And then in episode 6, we will be entering our villain era. We wanted to do a villain episode this season the second that we knew we were going to focus on superheroes. And it's episode 6 because while Emily and I do not endorse or follow numerology in the Bible, when you find the number 6, that is often a hint toward the imperfect or unfinished. And so that seemed appropriate. So we'll be asking, what does it mean to be a villain? How do we decide who villains are and who heroes are? And so for our historical villains, We will be talking about the Earth Liberation Front and the Weathermen, because these are groups from a few decades ago mostly who were trying to do good for the environment and ended up doing a lot of violence, really so much violence.
They're eco-terrorists is how
Yeah,
they've been labeled. Yeah.
yeah. And so, as you might imagine, the pop culture villains that we decided to talk about were Poison Ivy and Mr. Freeze. And while we talk about Poison Ivy and Mr. Freeze, we are probably going to wind up doing some compare contrast to Batman. Let's be honest about how that's going to work out.
Mm-hmm.
And when we started looking for biblical villains, as we considered the theme and connection of environmental concerns and the villains who we, especially these days, understand a little more than we used to, we decided that we should probably talk about Adam and Eve. And Steve, maybe? Sure.
Yes. I'm excited about all those connections. There's so many good, like, we call these people heroes. We say that they're bad. And yet, yeah. Ugh, that's going to be so much fun. And then for episode 7, John Brown was one of the first names we came up with for this season. Particularly, Kay came up with his name because his story isn't told nearly often enough. And the Philemon letter seemed like the obvious biblical comparison. And then Kay came up with the Deep Space Nine comparison of Kira Nerys and the connection between them all of really exploring and wondering how far will people who are not enslaved go for people who are enslaved.
Yes.
So I'm really excited to get into this, and I think it'll lead into the next episode really well too.
Yeah. And then for episode 8, we've been wanting to spotlight more 1517 Media Resources, which is the publishing house of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, which is where Emily and I are both pastors.
Mm-hmm.
This book that's coming out seemed like the perfect chance, which I'll get to in a second. And I also brought in the story of Marlon Brando sending Sacheen Littlefeather to the Oscars as a historical hero set, which is one heck of a story if you haven't heard it before. And we kind of went from there on this one. We'll also probably wind up talking about some more recent Oscar wins, because Marlon Brando and Sacheen Littlefeather were a few years ago now.
Mm-hmm.
But the book that we'll be talking about for our pop culture hero is called Call to Allyship. And that's from 1517 Media. And we're hoping to have one or more of the authors with us for this episode. But it looks like a great book, and we're looking forward to covering it with you. And then for a biblical hero, we thought we would bring in Mary, the mother of Jesus, or also known as Theotokos.
Because she literally makes space for God.
Yes, like in her body.
I'm just so excited.
And so the theme and connection for this episode will be making space for and amplifying other people's voices, because Marlon Brando did that for Sacheen Littlefeather. The Call to Allyship book does that for many different people. And Mary, of course, did that for God, which is pretty unique, really.
Mm-hmm. And the Call to Allyship book is a great resource, especially for congregations and folks in communities of faith, because it's not just that it does that, but it helps teach people how to do that.
Yes,
awesome.
In effective ways.
Yeah. And then for episode 9, Marsha P. Johnson was also one of the very first names that came to mind for this season. And we knew that we wanted to invite Lenny Duncan back, and they brought Magneto into the conversation. And so having the connections between Marsha P. Johnson, Magneto, and Rahab all were just like super exciting options, and looking at the connections of marginalized people and difficult choices. And this was about the point at which we realized we're also doing a lot of people in Jesus's genealogy in Matthew.
Yeah.
So
yes.
If you are interested in us doing, similar to doing like a whole curriculum for this, but doing a series of, Advent midweek ideas or something like that, please let us know, because that would be fun for us to design an Advent series on, and we would love to get paid to do this, because, it'd be nice to break even on this at some point.
One day. Yes, please.
Someday.
Also, to be entirely honest, we probably intend to steer the conversation during this episode with Lenny toward Black Panther in some way, because it is also connected to the concepts that we'll be talking about, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, particularly with Eric Killmonger or Njadaka, depending on who's naming him.
Yeah. And then for episode 10, we really wanted to look at the X-Men because they have such a variety of people and motives and so forth for what does it mean to be a hero. And while the
Mm-hmm.
comics in the original movie trilogy focused really well on racism and queer phobia and how the X-Men relate to those concepts, the X-Men also struck us as a really great connection with the disability rights movement. And so we'll be talking about the disability rights movement for our historical hero, and then for our biblical hero, we'll be talking about Jacob and his incident of wrestling with God, which is a fantastic story we don't tell in church often enough.
Mm-hmm.
And we will discuss the theme that God creates us with diversity on purpose. Like, that's not an accident, folks.
Yep. Yeah. I'm just so excited about this whole season.
Yeah,
Okay.
all these episodes are going to be great.
Breathe. Yeah. I'm so excited. Okay. And then for our, as of now, final episode for this season, honestly, we had a bunch of leftover names of people that we couldn't quite fit into other episodes. And so this episode kind of grew out of that list. I think both Kay and I are pretty sure that all of the names on this list at one point or another, there were different names in each spot. But this is how it worked out, and we're really excited about it. So our pop culture hero, we're going to look at Anita Hill and Christine Blasey Ford, and specifically like the heroes of the Me Too movement and the work of the Me Too movement, not just for, people testifying against future Supreme Court justices, but the broader Me Too movement as well.
Yes.
And then for a historical hero, we're going to talk about Corrie ten Boom, who I love. I read a book about her that was just fantastic, and so I love it. I think it was by her too. I don't know. And then for a biblical hero, we're going to talk about Tamar, who is Judah's daughter-in-law. There are multiple Tamars in the Bible, so if you are trying to get a sneak peek, make sure you find the one that's Judah's daughter-in-law for this.
Right.
And the connecting theme for this is courage in the face of power.
Yes. And so we mentioned our Patreon content earlier. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about the movie commentaries that we've been doing. Already done and up on our Patreon site, you can find the movie commentaries we've done for the movies Captain Marvel and Jupiter Ascending, both of which were a great time.
Yes, so much fun.
Our next 4 movie commentaries planned, which will take us through the summer and up to September. And those 4 movie commentaries that are coming up soon will be Deadpool 2, Thunder Force, Black Panther, and Pacific Rim.
I'm so excited.
Yes. We get to have so much fun in the name of this podcast this summer.
Yes. The podcast keeps getting better and better, and I just love it. So, yay.
Yes.
Also, for Patreon specials and options, in addition to our uncut episodes, which we are almost certainly guaranteed to have uncut episodes with Lenny, but also sometimes we have uncut episodes that aren't guest episodes, and sometimes they are. So we'll have all of our uncut episodes go up on Patreon, as well as all of our Patreon members get a discount code for our merch store, and we have lots of great merch. It's a merch store that we share with Horror Nerds at Church, so you get a discount code for any of the merch. And we'll also have a book and media list that you all get early access to. I did not do a great job of that in the last season, but we have some more ideas, and the book and media list that you'll get early access to is going to change and evolve over time, so you can always check back as we record new episodes and see what new books and media we're adding to it. Also, everyone is welcome to check out our bookshop.org lists, because we are an affiliate with them. So if you use our links, which is where we are putting all of our books on that list, if you use any of those links, then we get, a couple pennies or something, and who doesn't love a couple pennies and supporting independent bookstores? So anybody can access that list. That will be less of a priority for updating as we go, but will definitely be updated by the end of the season with all of the books. And then also, if you want to go through Patreon, you can, or you can just email us directly and we can work something out for those who are interested in turning this season into some sort of curriculum outline for folks, or who are interested in some sort of Advent midweek supper type of events, with particularly the ones that are in Jesus's genealogy.
Yeah. And we are, as we said, going to have a Muppets moment for each of these episodes. And this season, friend of the podcast, Pace Warfield, came up with a Muppet question that will actually beautifully suit all of our episodes, which is we will be asking the question again and again, what Muppet would play one or all of the heroes we're talking about in a Muppet Movie Spectacular version of their story? And so we look forward to asking that question. But since I have your attention, and because the Muppets and the Holy Spirit are all very into doing the unexpected, I think I'm also going to surprise Emily with a Muppets Moment question for this episode.
Good, because I was just trying to think of one.
Emily, what Muppet would you most love to have guest on one of our superhero episodes this season, if we could?
Ooh, okay, that is like the easiest answer in the world. Gonzo the Great, obviously. Gonzo's non-binary, so anything we do in June, great. Also, then comes Wrath after Pride, so that also works. But Gonzo the Great, literally a superhero. Like, how could we not pick Gonzo the Great to be a guest?
And has the cape.
What about you, Kay?
I'm going to confess, I knew that was going to be your answer.
Of course you did.
Because it was a little obvious. Well, I was going to surprise you with a question, but I also wanted to come up with a question I knew you could answer.
Yes.
And so my answer would be that I would, of course, also love to have Gonzo, but also as another guest to have, I think it would be great to have Miss Piggy, because what we need is a martial arts expert who can dissect all of the fight scenes with us and tell us what is and is not likely and useful in those scenes. Because we're going to be talking about an awful lot of pop culture heroes, and most of them have at least a few fight scenes in their stories.
That is brilliant. I love that. I think Miss Piggy would be great. Spectacular.
Yeah. Also, she just seems like she'd make a great guest, very excited, very into it,
Oh, yeah, and she would have plenty of opinions about all of the heroes and
everything.
Oh, my gosh.
And their outfits. Oh, my goodness.
Right? She would be just great. Yeah. Yeah, so that is our season 5 so far. That's what we're looking at, and we are super excited about it. And thank you for joining us for this brief-ish overview.
Yeah.
It's still kind of a mini-sode for us. Ish. Yeah. So thanks for joining us. Our theme music was by Rachel Meyer-Laughlin. Our Muppets music was by Brenda Boss. And the new seasonal art was by Pace Warfield, who continues to do a spectacular job for us.
Yay!
Yes, and even got us special Pride cover photos. So if this goes up in June, check it out. If this goes up after June, we might still just have those up because they're fantastic. But you can definitely see them on our Facebook page. If you look at our cover photo album, you'll be able to see all of our cover photos, past and present. Also, you can still catch our revisited season 1 episodes for those of you who are wanting to connect with the scripture readings that a lot of us hear in worship on Sundays. We're a week off from what we were 3 years ago, and so there's a little bit of audio changes, but if you watch on our YouTube playlist, the captions and the little notes that I put in those videos and the episode descriptions will tell you which one we're actually doing for 2024, which is this year. So, catch us next time for our first full episode diving into Superman. This podcast has been produced by us, Emily Ewing and Kay Rohloff. For more fun, check us out on Twitter, Facebook, and Blue Sky at Nerds at Church, or contact us at nerdsatchurch@gmail.com. And we will link to the YouTube for this, which is where our captions will be.
Yes. Also, if you like what you've heard, rate us or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Facebook, or wherever you catch your podcasts. If you want access to our uncut guest episodes and interviews, movie commentaries, and more, support us on Patreon at patreon.com/nerdsatchurch. Starting at just $5 a month, it's cheaper than going to literally any superhero movie ever made.
Yeah, pretty much. Also, it's cheaper than buying your superhero outfit.
Yeah. Even on Wish. Please don't buy them on Wish. They're terrible.
Exactly. Also, let us know on Blue Sky, Facebook, or Twitter which Muppet you would want to have as a guest this season.
As the ancient Christians said,
Pax Vobiscum.